Alright guys, welcome back for another video on HAIKYU Fly High, and today we'll be doing some testing with my Skillet 4 Oikawa, and also I'll do a build guide for him towards the end of the video as well. Okay, so let's start off with some testing. The main thing I want to test is kind of how his attack tempo is going to be stacked up, and also at what timing are they going to be consumed. And then furthermore, I also want to test when this leading stack is going to be applied, and also when this inspired buff are going to be applied as well. Okay, now the guinea pig we're going to use for this testing is going to be Aaron Jura, and for simplicity, I already took off all of his potential. So you can see here he has no buff on awareness, strength, attack technique, reflex, spirit, or defense technique at all, and that's kind of the stats we'll be tracking in order to see whether or not all of the buff that he will be getting from Oikawa are going to be applied. Okay, so let's just quickly do some testing now. So first thing I want to test is when is inspired going to happen. Okay, so let's quickly stop the matching here, just so you guys can see. So right now you can see awareness for Aaron Jura is going to be increased by 32.5. Now the reason why it's increased by 32.5 is because he is facing diagonal to Oikawa, so that basically means this is already being applied at start of the match. So this is basically inspired. What's going to happen is, oh sorry, it's just buff here, not this one. But basically you're going to get 30% because he is inspired, and at the same time because I have skill rate 4 from Oikawa, he's also going to get 50% of Oikawa's one. Now if we jump to Oikawa's awareness, we can see here Oikawa start off with just 5% base awareness. However, there's also going to be a 20% extra, and that is due to the fact that when Kanji Coconut Girl was on the field, whoever is serving will be getting 20% awareness, okay? Obviously, Orca will be serving, so that's why there's 25% here. However, if you actually take a look at the buff he's able to provide to Iron Jura, you can see it's only 32.5, and what that basically means is that outside of the 30 from Inspired, Orca will only transfer 2.5% awareness from his skill rate 4, which basically means that the skill rate 4 effect for Oikawa is only gonna be applied at the start of the very match, before any other skills kick in, at least for the time being. However, we'll see that changing for a bit. Okay, so now keep a note of this. This is 32.5%. That's the buff to Aaron Jura. Now let's do a serve. And we're going to see again. So this is right now he's about to go to serve. He hasn't touched the ball yet. You can see the awareness buff to Aaron Jura is still 32.5. However, once he touched the ball, you can see here what's going to happen is that this suddenly went up to 42.5, and what that basically means is that now it's actually taking into account the extra 20% from the awareness buff that Oikawa had. Previously it was just 5%, so we took half that, that's 2.5. However, now because it's 25%, you take half that, that's 12.5. Add on the 30 from Inspired, that's 42.5. And what that basically means is that the skill rate 4 effect from Oikawa, even though it's applied at the very start of the match, it's also been refreshed every single time when someone on your side is actually making touch of the ball. Okay, so even if you get some kind of buff to Oikawa only in the middle of the match, they would still be applied to whoever he's facing diagonally. Okay, it's just like a one ball touch delay, but that's absolutely fine. On that note, I also want to point something else, which is that Oikawa at skill rate 4 is able to transfer 50% of all of the attacking stats. However, there's a cap for all of the awareness, strength, and attack technique. There's a cap to that, but for all of the basic stats, there's a cap of 1,500. Now, as you can see, this is actually going to be applied to the in-game stats, which for power attack, set, and serve is actually quite easy to reach. However, let's say you actually have Oikawa facing diagonal to a quick spiker. You can see here I'm only going to be around 2,000 quick attack stats. So right now, this is not quite enough to completely max out the maximum amount of quick attack stat buff is able to provide to whoever diagonal. Okay, so that's just something to bear in mind. If you really want to max this out, you may need to change your potential slightly, or maybe just in the future when you have him at higher skill resonance, or maybe let's say you have stronger coach and also cheerleading squad, etc. You can get over those passive quick attack stats from there as well. Okay, so that's kind of the main thing I want to talk about. But right now we already see awareness is being applied and has already been refreshed. Okay, now let's take a look at the attack tempo. So as of right now, I haven't used any ultimate attack at all. So that's kind of why there's no attack tempo. And my arrow and Jiro hasn't touched the ball at all. So that's kind of why there's no attack tempo. Now, if you take a look at Oikawa's skill, Oikawa's ultimate set, when he uses it for the first time, you saw it will gain 5 attack tempo. So let's track when this will actually be applied. Okay, whether it's before the set or after the set. So right now, there's nothing. Even at this point, there's absolutely nothing because I haven't chose who to attack yet. I could end up choosing Oikawa to spike, in which case he wouldn't set, right? So that's kind of attack tempo is still not being applied. However, now let's choose my Aaron Jiro to actually spike. And okay, I need to finish the action. So now Aaron Jiro is actually going to spike. And what's going to happen, you can see all of a sudden 6 attack tempo is already being moved, even though I haven't made any spike yet. And where's this 6 attack tempo going to be coming from? One is going to be coming from the 5 stack when he's actually using a setting attack. And then the second thing is this is an ultimate attack. And remember from his skill 1, whenever you saw use an ultimate attack, you're also going to get 1 attack tempo. So at this point, it's already 6 attack tempo. Okay, so this is before spiking even happened. Now let's say he actually touched the ball. What's going to happen is that I'm about to spike. However, at this point, you're going to see no attack tempo. Oh, actually, there's 1 attack tempo left remaining. However, let's take a look at how much spiking buff Oikawa just provided. Oikawa just provided 140% increase to the spike power. Now, if we take a look at Oikawa's skill 3, what it says is that for each stack, I'm at max level, okay, by the way. So for each stack, I'm going to increase 20% of spiking power. So what that really means is that I originally started off with 6 attack tempo. After I chose my Iron Jiro to spike, all of a sudden 1 attack tempo was added. It becomes 7 attack tempo. Then afterwards, all of those 7 attack tempo will have been consumed in order to give this 140% buff. And then only after this has been consumed, I then also get 1 other attack tempo back as well. Okay, the way to interpret this is that if we take a look at skill 1, what's going to happen is that you get 1 attack tempo when you use an ultimate attack, and also 1 attack tempo when whoever inspired is actually touching the ball. And what that basically means is that one of those is going to be applied before Oikawa consume the attack tempo, and then another one is going to be applied after Oikawa consume the attack tempo. Okay, so that's kind of what you see. I'll start off with 6. 1 of them have been applied to trigger, and it all of a sudden becomes 7. It then be consumed, and then I'll have the other one added on, which is why I am now starting off with 1 attack tempo. Okay, so even though it's both from skill 1, just bear in mind the timing of those 2 conditions are going to be different. Now, in all honesty, it doesn't really matter which one it is, because the main important thing to know is that after you have consumed your attack tempo, the maximum you can get from that spike is only going to be 1 attack tempo, and that's going to be annoying later on when we have to talk about his memory, because his memory does have a trigger condition with 2 attack tempo. Okay, and this already means that his memory is not always going to be permanently on, depending on at which point you actually win the point. Because if I actually won this spike, then I'm actually going to start off the next rally with only 1 attack tempo. Okay, so that's something for you to bear in mind. Now let's take a look at the other thing, which is that I'm almost about to win the match. Remember, whenever I make a ball touch, my awareness would have been updated. So let's take a look at how did this 104 come about. Okay, so this 104, obviously 30 came from this, and then what's going to happen is that because I already have leading, I would have increased my awareness by another 40%, and this already shows that as soon as you consume the attack tempo, this lead buff is going to be applied straight away. You don't need to wait for an extra rally or anything like that. This will just be applied straight away. So from the 30 from inspired and 40 from lead, this in total is already going to be 70% buff. So there's still going to be another extra 34. And where that's coming from is obviously going to be from Oikawa skill res 4. And because skill res 4 is only going to take half of that, what's going to happen is that 5 plus 61 is going to be 66. You take half of that, that's going to be 33. We have an additional 34 here, and where's that 1 extra attack tempo coming from? It's coming from here. Okay, the 1 attack tempo is going to give that 1 extra awareness. So that's kind of why Aaron Jiro have exactly 104% awareness, and we can track this all back to how this is being added up. Okay, it's just from the combination of inspired plus lead and also plus the skill rating 4 effect from Oikawa. So we can explain all of the math here. However, now let's take a look at this 104 and see what then happens. Now we have actually won the point, but it hasn't moved on to the next rally. What you're then going to see is that awareness has dropped. Okay, so what this means is that if you actually also take a look at this, you no longer see that inspired buff, and you no longer see that skill rating 4 buff from Oikawa anymore. So even though inspired and the skill reservoir effect does kind of like update every single time when you touch the ball. It also does get removed at the end of each rally, and this is going to be important because if we actually make a substitution now for someone else, what we can then see is that in the next new rally, because SP Oikawa is no longer there, and also inspired, and also the skill red 4 effect has already been removed at the end of the last rally, you would no longer be able to see that buff, okay? You only see a 41% buff here. And that 41% is going to be from the 40% from lead and also 1% from attack tempo, okay? So hopefully that can explain all of the Oikawa's mechanics. So just to summarize, Oikawa's inspired is going to be as inspired and also skill rating 4. Those are actually going to be updated. The buff will be updated every single time when you touch the ball. However, it's also going to be removed at the end of each rally, which basically means that if you do actually sub out SP or Kawa, what's going to end up happening is that you would no longer be able to benefit from that from the character who originally had that inspired buff. However, the leading buff is always going to be present, okay, even if you actually sub out SP or Kawa. And then on the attack tempo front, attack tempo, when you actually consume them, it's going to be a bit annoying in the sense that you maybe end up in a situation where you only have one attack tempo left over because the person you are making that ultimate attack basically add that one extra one after the attack tempo consumption is used. However, you won't be able to get 2 stacks in order to trigger Oikawa's memory effect. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about the memory now. But hopefully all of that testing makes sense for you guys, and that's going to be quite important when we actually talk about how you may actually want to team build around him. Okay, so let's just quickly go to SP Oikawa's memory. So if we take a look at this, what it says is at the start of each round, you just actually need to be more than 2 stacks as well, so it's even harder. But basically, as we have seen before, if you actually want the point using an ultimate spike, the best case you can do is that you can only finish off that rally with only 1 attack tempo, and what that basically means is that you can no longer consistently ensure that this buff will always be applied to Oikawa, okay? And this is going to be especially important if you have Oikawa as skill rating 4, because when you do have him as skill rating 4, what's going to happen is that he would be able to transfer 50% of all of his attacking stats onto whoever have that inspired. However, it's going to be capped. And normally what that basically means is, for example, if I want to max out the attack technique buff I need to provide, I need to have 20 attack technique on him. Now, if you were thinking previously that I can get an extra additional 10 from the memory, so therefore I need 10 from potential, now you have to think again, because we have just showed that the buff you'll be able to get from the memory is not going to be consistent, and therefore when you actually try to build him as, especially as skill rating 4, you actually want to get him as close to 3000 base stats, 200 strength, and also 20% attack technique just from the potential on himself alone. Okay, and now let's quickly talk about his potential set. So for potential set, there's only going to be one I recommend, which is going to be 4-piece precise set and also 2-piece precise serve. You definitely don't want the set it dump one because this is like awareness and set it dump, which he doesn't even have. And then the serving one is not really worth the value for 4-piece on this because it's more for setting rather than for serving. Okay, so that's kind of why you want a 4-piece in precise set. Now in terms of the main stat and the substats, it's going to differ slightly when you have him as skill rating 4, but in one sense, not too much different. The main thing here is that for slot 6, you definitely want attack technique no matter what. It's just the most useful buff for him, considering the fact that he's kind of already able to buff his other multiplier, but he has no way of buffing his own attack technique, so you kind of need this. It just from the maximizing damage point of view, and also if you do have him as skill rating 4, you are looking for that 20% mark overall, so you definitely need the main stats here. That 15% will help a long way towards reaching that threshold of 20 in order to max out the amount of buff he can get give by his skill rating 4. Okay, and then for slot 2, I'm only going to recommend strength as well. Once again, if you actually have him as skill rating 4, he does actually self buff himself a lot with strength. I think he might be able to self buff with like 120% strength or something like that, but that still means there's a gap of 80 you need to somehow get from either teammates or from yourself. So that's kind of what strength is always going to be good here. And even if you do not have him as skill resonance 4, in all honesty, none of the other main stats are going to be worth it, because you definitely don't need awareness, because he can already buff up your whole team with up to 100% awareness. He doesn't really need surf or power spike or quick spike. They can actually be helpful in some weird situation. For example, if you really want to buff up the quick spike stat for the one with the inspire buff, then you might be choosing, let's say, a quick spike main stat here. It's going to be a weird choice and very niche pick, so that's kind of what I'm not going to talk too much about it. And then for setting stat itself, if you guys know, well, if you have seen my videos previously, you probably know that when you have a set main stat, it's actually going to be just applied to the basic stats here, which basically would be activated before the match start. So basically, when you have, let's say, 35% set buff, it's only going to be 35% of this 1950. It's not actually 35% of this entire number. So that's kind of what a set buff is not going to be as valuable as a strength buff, which only happens in the middle of the match. Okay, so that's kind of what the main stats you really want for slot 2. It's going to be strength. And then for slot 4, in all honesty, it doesn't really matter. You probably want to go for looking for substats instead. And in those cases, if you do want to have a masquerade 4, you want to max out your diagonal inspired buff, you want to make sure you go for as much strength and also attack technique possible. Okay. And like I said earlier, the end result you kind of want from your potential is that you want to look at least 20% attack technique and also around 80% strength. So obviously here you can see I'm slightly over on attack technique, whereas I'm definitely under on strength. So if I really have a way to optimize it, I'll probably reduce my attack technique by another 2.4. And then try to increase my strength a bit more instead to balance it out. Okay, so that's kind of how you can optimize the stats for SP Oikawa. Okay, now let's talk about his memory choices. His own memory is obviously going to be a decent choice. I just find it to be a bit inconsistent. So I have shown earlier in the testing, you can't actually always guarantee you'll be starting off the round with 2 attack tempo. So if you don't actually have this activated, then you won't be able to enjoy any of the other buffs. And then even though he buff up everything, like all of the offensive stats, half of those stats are not even going to be useful for Oikawa himself. And then even if we're talking about skill resonance 2, where he can transfer some of those buffs to the one with inspired, reality is over the basic stats, you can already reach 3000 threshold without needing any additional help. So you won't be able to provide anything extra to your spiker. Awareness, your spiker doesn't need it because he Oikawa himself can already give everyone 100% awareness. Attack technique, you'll be more or less already maxing that out with your potential as well. So the only buff you will actually be able to provide to your spiker, even as skill in 4, it's just going to be the strength, which once you have a masculine in 4 and then you half this 10%, it's just a 5% buff strength to your spiker, which in all honesty is not that high. And that's kind of why, in comparison, I personally actually think SP Sugar Warrior's memory is also a very interesting choice. Because first of all, this is only able to increase 8% basic stat, which whilst it's lower than this is a lot more consistent. I have no condition that I have to play around with in order to get this. And then the other thing is that this one can actually buff up the spiker with power attack and quick attack buff, which in my opinion is probably going to be higher than whatever 5% buff SP Oikawa is able to provide only as skill in 4 and only every now and then when this condition is actually triggered. So in all honesty, I actually think SP Super Warriors memory is also going to be a very, very good choice if we do actually have it available. Now, outside of the SP rarity, UR1 I already mentioned, UR Oikawa's one can be a good choice, especially if you actually position SP Oikawa in kind of the second surfing position. And then for the lower rarity, the best one is probably going to be Shirabu's one, because Oikawa can quite easily critical set, and then that basically means your spiker can actually get 16% strength, which once again, in reality, this is probably actually going to be more buff to the spiker than what SP Oikawa's memory is able to do by himself, okay? So that's going to be all of the choices from the memory perspective. In the future, I would also want to give a shout out to SP Kageyama's memory, because that one can actually buff up strength for the setter, and especially if you have SP Oikawa as skill in 4, what you realize is that out of all of the stats that he's able to buff up, strength is probably the one that you have the biggest gap in order to cap it. So any memory which can buff up strength is good in my opinion for SP Oikawa. And that's kind of why SP Kageyama's one in the future can be a very good choice for him. Okay, but yeah, so that's going to be today's video in terms of the build guide and also testing for SP Oikawa. Let me know what you guys think of him so far.